Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Monday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. More reaction to Dennis Schröder rejoining the Lakers. What was behind the Lakers thinking? And who's going to be guarding wings next year? That's next on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, sometimes on weekends, Andy, as we demonstrated this weekend. Like, a big news happens on Friday, boom, podcast. But always free, never behind a paywall, and Locked On Lakers on YouTube, which is pushing 8,000 subscribers, and we appreciate everybody's support there. We're going to be wrapping in some comments on the YouTube page into today's episode. So it's a reminder, great way to be part of the show. That's where you go to get the podcast usually a little bit earlier before the audio product goes up. So a lot happened over the course of the weekend. More reporting on Dennis Schröder. We got a little clarity on what the Lakers were thinking, a little clarity on how they might plan on deploying all these backcourt pieces in a way that lets them play and still provide some wing defense. That's going to be a debate later in the show. But let's start with this, Andy. The Lakers and Mark Stein talked about it. Dan Wojcicki at the LA Times talked about it, and quite frankly, Rob Pelinka talked about it in his in the press release for Dennis Schröder, kind of breaking down some of the reasons that they brought him back from strong play at the Euro Cup championships to a very obvious desire from Schröder to be back in LA. We got a little more insight into what the Lakers were thinking.
Yeah, this offseason proved, if nothing else, between Dennis Schröder and Patrick Beverley, if you want to be a Laker, don't be shy about it.
Just ask. Ask.
Yeah, the answer is always no, unless you ask. And look, sometimes it will be no, as Kyrie Irving demonstrated. He wanted to be a Laker, but unfortunately he had to, on his own, I guess him and his aunt, who serves as his agent, they had to work out a sign and trade with the Lakers because the Nets said, like, look, if you can get yourself signed and traded to another team, knock yourself out. Until then, let us know how it ends.
Perhaps he should have fired his aunt and signed with Clutch. That might have solved the problem.
It's never a bad way of going on.
Right. So ask first. If you want to be a Laker, ask first. If they say no, and if you're Beverly and Schröder, the answer is like, that was enough right there. That was enough for those two guys. But if they say no, go become a Clutch client, and then, we'll see what's going on.
I'll say this, if you're a Clutch client, you want to play for the mid-level, you're here.
But, so Schröder has lobbied very hard. He, and when he signed, when he signed the deal and all of that, immediately went to social media and talked about how excited he was to be back. And so, you see it. This is at his Insta. This past year didn't feel right. I felt misunderstood and nobody knew the real story. I'm coming back to the biggest organization to make bleep right. I hope Laker Nation is going to support me every single day. I will give everything I have every single day. It's an honor to play for the Lakers. Can't wait to get started. Heart emojis.
Purple and gold heart emojis.
Well, yes. Better than the
important to point out.
Yeah.
It's not just love, it's purple and gold love.
So that matters. It does matter that, that these guys want to come back. I do think it's a good sign that Schröder didn't like the sort of the taste of how things broke up. I do think that's probably influenced by how disastrously things have gone since he left here, including turning down the money that could have kept him here. But that's all water under the bridge, Andy. The point is, he's happy to be back, and he really feels like he has something to prove.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm very interested. Maybe there'll be another presser with Schröder for his return. When he said, like, there's details about this that aren't correct, I'm very curious what they are, because Schröder actually last season, to his credit, he was being a good sport about it. I think it was on his birthday or something like that. He was like, make all the fumble the bag jokes that you want. So that was pretty much him acknowledging, like, yeah, I had this monster offer on the table, thought I could do better, seemed to have certain misgivings towards the organization, and then, as it turns out, could only do considerably worse in the offseason. But like, it is good that he wants to be back. I can see, though, why, whether you're talking about Schröder or you're talking about the Lakers, this was something you and I had talked about a little bit before the show began offline, like, kind of, I don't want to say hyping this up, that would be too strong, but certainly offering a fair amount of context that sounds, in certain respects, like they're trying to convince Lakers Nation that this is a good idea.
Well, the reporting from Dan Wojcicki, for example, pointed to the Lakers kind of comparing this situation to Dwight Howard and bringing him back to the organization after he had no question been humbled by the league in addition to just the bad breakup with the Lakers. Schröder, obviously there was less time in between, but didn't have a good year last year, wasn't particularly sought after this offseason until Eurobasket, and we'll get to that in a second. It means a couple things. I think, to some degree there's a little bit of kind of holding ourselves up and saying, like, hey, he had to kind of prove some things to us before we'd bring him back. But also it was an indicator that it might have been worse than people were thinking, or than maybe was reported during that season in terms of the relationship between the Lakers and Schröder.
I mean, I don't know. I always got a sense that it wasn't particularly good, particularly as it went along. They were looking to trade him at the deadline when it started becoming really clear that he wasn't going to be accepting the extension, and the Lakers were faced with what ultimately happened, which was they lost him as a free agent for nothing after giving up Danny Green and a first-round pick to get him. And, I started thinking about all the sequences of events. Like, he's been seen, to be honest, over the last year and change as kind of like an NBA loser after, fumbling the bag like we talked about. Then he ends up signing with the Celtics. The Celtics trade him and then instantly go from a team scuffling around 500 with everybody wondering, okay, is this really the time that Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum should finally get broken up, to arguably the best team in the NBA over the last 2 years, getting to the finals? Obviously, it's not all because of getting rid of Schröder, but Derek White, for example, was clearly a decidable upgrade over Schröder. Then there was
especially for that team. Oh, absolutely.
Right. But then there also where there were these specifics to the Lakers with, again, spurning their effort to, I cannot emphasize this enough, overpay the living bleep out of him. He screwed the pooch during the playoffs, particularly as they went along. He kept getting COVID, not COVID, as we kept referring to it. He was not known as a great locker room presence. He rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way by basically declaring himself a starter right out of the gate during his introductory press conference. Like, he's never been seen as a team first guy. He's been viewed in certain respects, I think understandably, as a redundant signing, even if he's not 100% totally redundant. And he, as I laid out during Saturday's bonus show, Dennis Schröder is an avatar for totally mismanaged assets and botched front office plans, which obviously isn't Schröder's fault, at least not entirely, but he does serve as a quite literally flesh and blood reminder of all this. So I can understand that
I was somewhat surprised that they brought him back, because it opens the opportunity for people like us to point that out.
Right. All I'm saying is I get the Lakers offering happy context and, pointing out the things that went well this offseason, and like the idea of, his attitude during Eurobasket. What they're really saying is better than the attitude he had with the Lakers or in certain other stops.
And we'll talk about that in a second, because I think a lot of what people liked about that, whether the Lakers or other teams, and interest certainly has crept up on Schröder since his play in Europe. But I think what they liked about it is he went and played hard without actually having an NBA contract. You get hurt, you could be out, sure, nobody's going to touch you for a year. So I think that was, impressive to people. Michael Chu on the YouTube page says, "I love this edition. It's a great deal on a very talented player. He's humble and he has to show he's a team player now." It's sort of what you're referring to, Andy. "It offers a lot of flexibility when LeBron inevitably misses games this season. And let's face it, we need depth with LeBron and AD getting older. The Lakers want to run, so having an additional ball handler and scorer can't hurt." So I want to talk about a couple things that are brought up in that comment about Schröder as a hedge for injuries, Schröder as a guy who can push the ball, an additional ball handler, and positionally how some of these things are going to break down, because some very interesting reporting about how the Lakers plan on deploying this massive guards that they have at their disposal. So we'll do it next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Rocket Money. Are you wasting money on subscriptions? 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about. Maybe it's an unused Amazon Prime account or a Hulu account that never gets streamed. Maybe you're still paying for Napster. Whatever it is, there is a great app that I use that helps me track all of my expenses. You really shouldn't be charged by them because they no longer exist. Because of this, I never waste money.
Blockbuster Video. Get rid of that one.
I never waste money on subscriptions that I don't even use. You might have even heard of it. It's called Rocket Money. It was formerly known as Truebill. The app shows you all of your subscriptions in one place and cancels what you don't want for you. Rocket Money can even find subscriptions you didn't know you were paying for. Again, maybe you've got a Napster account. Get rid of that thing. It's a waste of money. You may even find out you've been double charged. To cancel that subscription, all you got to do is just hit cancel, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. Cancel unnecessary subscriptions with Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon. It could save you hundreds a year. rocketmoney.com/lockedon.
All right. So to his point, Andy, well, we read the comment there from Michael Chu talking about, the need for Schröder as providing flexibility. He talked about LeBron inevitably missing games, but it's really about more than that. It's about the potential health of Kendrick Nunn. It's about the potential health of Patrick Beverley, who, again, I love this acquisition for the Lakers. Going to be far more valuable to them this year than THT would have been. But he misses like 35 games a year. Like it's just that's the pattern. So Pat Bev cannot be relied on to be in the lineup every night, and this becomes more important as the show goes along for other conversations we're going to have. But Nunn, we still haven't had any evidence he's going to be able to play. We're still not sure. LeBron could miss some time and all that kind of stuff. And so, yes, having more good players around does offer more options. But at the same time, because they are adding to positions where they already have people. And Johnny Guitar Watson says, we are low-key very deep. With that being said, I'd be happy if we made the play-in the loaded West. So excitement and
deepest team to miss the playoffs is quite an honor.
I mean, there's some excitement in there, but like that thing, like we're low-key deep. Not really. They're very high-key deep in one place. They have a ton of guards, and they're not deep basically everywhere else. And so at center, I think they're okay at center. It makes me it is both practically defensible to add another player of Schröder's caliber, and he's not a bad player by any stretch. But it also sets off alarm bells, even when you step back from how are they going to put all these people on the court again? It makes you a little bit nervous too. Like why they need them or potentially could need them.
It's funny that it's a reminder that the roster still feels like it's in flux, because first when you bring in Patrick Beverley, then when you bring in Dennis Schröder, you've got the redundancy factor. You've got the, oh my God, that is a collection of personalities to go along with Russell Westbrook and some other guys. It feels like a reminder that Westbrook may still, may still be on the block, that a deal could potentially be coming. As much as to me, it feels more like it's settled that he's going to be here. It would never shock me if he ended up getting moved in the end, because this is obviously something the Lakers have been weighing for a while.
The Lakers are not committed to Russell Westbrook for this season. They're committed, thankfully, to the idea of not doing something dumb in order to look like they're trying to save the season. They seem genuinely interested in only doing something that raises their prospects this season to an acceptable level, in order to sacrifice the few remaining assets that they have. That isn't a commitment to Westbrook. That's a commitment to something different. That means they have to keep Russ if they can't hit that bar.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen a few people, Dan Wojcicki from the LA Times is one of the people that this comes to mind, but I've seen a few writers talk about, the Lakers projecting their comfort with heading into this season with Russell Westbrook on the roster. And, it's framed always through the idea of they have not gotten an offer that they feel like puts them in true contention or would be worth giving up the 2027 and 2029 picks. There is the idea
or the flexibility for this offseason.
Right.
I
was going to say, we talked about this in a recent show about how the Lakers have basically one shot to improve the team as much as possible. And you can either try to do it this season, and if you do that, you are going to be firing all the ammo you have left, and it's a pretty limited arsenal. Or you could wait to this offseason, quite possibly have 30 to 35 million in cap space, plus the 2 draft picks and the draft pick that they have in 2023 that will be swapped with the Pelicans. And you might find yourself in a better opportunity to do that, which obviously has to be balanced against the idea of LeBron being 1 year older, Anthony Davis, whatever injury issues he may encounter this season, yet another season without continuity, all that stuff. But I think they understand the idea that you only have one crack at this, and the best crack at this big picture might be the one where Russ stays on the roster. But to me, that's not comfort with this. That's resignation. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
they may feel like they can be better this season than they were last year with Russ. And I happen to believe that's true. If guys stay healthy, they will be better with Russell Westbrook on this team. Last year, so many things went so disastrously. It's disingenuous and inaccurate to put it all on Russ. Russ was just the loudest issue that they have. I'm not saying that he's a good fit. He isn't. I'm not saying that I'm confident that he's going to have a better attitude heading into the season, be more flexible. I'm not. All I'm saying is, if LeBron and AD stay healthy, Kendrick Nunn is available, whatever, the issues that will exist with Russ will hurt the Lakers less by definition of just absolutely. Other guys being available.
And then you add to that the potential of maybe adjusting to a different role, having a different attitude, and all that kind of stuff. And we'll see. Before we move on to, I think, just some fascinating reporting on how the Lakers plan to deploy these guards, how they plan on defending potentially on the wing, and who they plan on using. How much do you care? Because this from HZR on the comments page, honestly, guys, the disrespect towards Dennis is just silly. The guy is still a great player, especially when you did not sleep under a rock and watched Eurobasket over the last couple of weeks. And he was admittedly, reportedly, I was one of the people under the rock. I was not watching Eurobasket, but I was keeping up a little bit, reading about reports on who's playing well and whatever. How much do you care that Schröder played well at Eurobasket? Because, it is, for people who poo-poo it, it is a high level of basketball. That is really good basketball that's being played over there. But at the same time, like, do I care necessarily that he was playing well over there? Does that make me think he's going to be a different player for the Lakers this year than he otherwise would have been? Not really, at least not for me.
I'm looking at his numbers right now. They feel very much like Dennis Schröder numbers that he did over with Germany, other than the fact that he shot awful from behind the line. It's, I believe, a shorter line, and he was dreadful. So, if you're going to apply...
But Schröder's not a good three-point shooter. Like, we established that on the weekend show.
I know, but even by Schröder...
I know he was even worse. He was like 20%.
Right. Yeah. So, if we're going to be literal the way it's been recommended in viewing the Eurobasket stuff, and then you got to take the bad with the good. I admittedly, I didn't watch any of this either, but his production to me looks like Dennis Schröder production. And neither one of us have ever said he's a bad player. I don't think he's as good as he thinks he is. And I think part of the problem with Schröder that they had during the season when he was with the Lakers, and this was the big reason that I went from, despite never having been a particularly big fan of his game over his career, I went from liking the deal to not liking it pretty quickly and pretty firmly when once I realized he was going to be starting, and that it seemed like the starting was being driven, at least in part, by the politics of trying to keep him and therefore keep him happy, because I don't think Dennis Schröder is a starting caliber point guard. He is capable enough if you need him to do that. I think in reality, he is a high-end bench player, which is not an insult. High-end bench player is really valuable for a contending team. Like a guy like Schröder playing at his best off the bench, like the year that he almost won Sixth Man of the Year, that's a really valuable player. That's not an insult. But I think with the Lakers, in certain respects, he was asked to do more than he really should, or play in a role that isn't best suited for him, in part to assuage his ego. So,
yeah, no, and I think that's, like I mentioned before, that's probably the biggest thing about Eurobasket that impressed people, is he went there, he played without a contract, and so on and so on. But the flip side is he's also trying to find a job in the league. I just don't put that much stock into it. I think the Lakers made a signing that, in a vacuum, makes sense. He's as good of a player as we were both kind of in the rush for getting the show done. I completely forgot that they opened up an extra roster spot with the inclusion of Stanley Johnson into the THT deal. So they still have an open roster space. So that changes the dynamics of it a little bit. Like it's not a harmful signing. It adds tremendous clutter to a already cluttered situation. And to that point, some from both Dan Wakey, from Mark Stein, really interesting reporting on how exactly they plan on getting all these guys on the floor, particularly defensively. So we'll do that next. Okay, so Stein, Andy writes, with Westbrook poised to remain a Laker when new coach Darvin Ham opens his first training camp as LA's new head coach, sources say Beverly is regarded internally by the club as a 3-and-D wing and not as a point guard at this stage of his career. The Lakers, in other words, see Westbrook and Schröder as their point guards as of September 18th, and the likes of Beverly, Kendrick Nunn, Austin Reaves, and Lonnie Walker as 2s and 3s. Dan Wakey essentially echoing the same thing. Sources say the Lakers hope to use Beverly as a defender against top-level wings, and while using a player like Schröder to chase high-movement point guards such as John Morant and Steph Curry. This team, though, will undoubtedly have to use small lineups as currently constructed. And that's how they use Schröder a lot in his season here, to chase around guys like that who move around.
And look,
certainly
just to make it clear,
I
was going to say, just to make it clear to people who, or at least this one guy who thinks we're just crapping on Schröder, said during Saturday's show, I think he can be an undisciplined defender, but he works at it. And
he put in the effort.
I think often point of attack, he's effective. He definitely puts effort behind it. Like, frankly, I did not expect him to be quite as determined and competitive defensively as he was. It was actually
he bought in. He did what Frank Vogel, he from an effort standpoint. I'm not smart enough to break down schematically but from an effort standpoint, he put in the work.
No doubt.
This to me is amazing, and God is in the details here, no question. How you define exactly what a primary wing defender is and which wings are defending and what constitutes a wing and whatever. But the idea, Andy, to me, of putting Beverly in that place where you are relying on a 34-year-old who misses 30-something games a year over the last couple of years to take on the role of a primary wing defender, because this is how you've constructed your roster, is a recipe for major problems going forward. Like that is not a sustainable strategy.
I mean, again, it really depends a lot on the definition of wing, because there are a lot of people who consider two guards to be wings. And if that's the case, Beverly has shown that he can guard up to that point. Like if he, even at 6'1", if he's guarding somebody 6'5", even 6'6", he's shown that he can actually do that. He's really strong. He gets a fair amount of benefit of the doubt. And, as mentioned, the idea that at this particular stage and age of his career, chasing around point guards might not be the best role for him. And, there are plenty of point of attack opportunities that he could have.
I'm not
guarding twos,
but like,
stuff like
are
that.
we talking right? If we're not, are we talking about him running around for a game with Jayson Tatum? We've got a problem. If we, if it's larger guards, then okay. Or it's just it is. I read that with an eyebrow raised. Is all I'm saying.
Well, what I read it to mean, because again, a lot of this is going to come down to semantics to some degree, is we're going to have some really interesting floor combinations moving forward. We are going to see a lot of defensive cross-matching going on. Like the position that you play on offense is going to feel far more defined by the number 1 through 5 than your defensive assignment, I think, moving forward. Because, for example, like you had mentioned Jayson Tatum as like a traditional 3, which he would be. I could see a lot of situations where Anthony Davis is the guy guarding Jayson Tatum for at least the first half of a game or something like that. And LeBron is on Boston's 4, because that could feel like just too much to start out a game with LeBron, or just AD guarding more of
theoretically there's a center on the floor of it. But this gets to it, because like, again, if you're going to try to play, as Dan points out, like if the goal is to, you treat Westbrook and Schröder as a more traditional point guard rotation, and you have these other 4 guys who are spread between your 2 and 3. We laid out for the weekend show how difficult it's going to be to get all of those guys on the floor, understanding that LeBron is going to play 35 minutes a game, or 32, 33 a night. Anthony Davis is going to play 30, and they're not all going to be at center. You've got Troy Brown, who theoretically, is an actual wing defender, like somebody who signed to do that. You have
same with Juan
JTA,
Toscano Anderson.
Right. Is another guy who you kind of signed to play that role. And if the goal, if they are going to try to figure out a way to leverage all of these guards that they have, and there's no question, Andy, it's a pretty good group of 6 guards that they've got. Westbrook, Beverly, Nunn, Reaves,
Walker,
Lonnie Walker, and who am I forgetting? Oh, Pat Bev.
Schröder.
I didn't say Pat Bev. Oh, Schröder. Thank you. Like those are credible NBA players, but trying to sort of shoehorn those guys into situations where maybe you're playing 3 of them at a time means you're going to have to go small a lot, which is fine to some degree, although you could be putting LeBron and Anthony Davis in some more taxing defensive situations than you would otherwise like. So I think there are going to be limitations to that. There's also the limitations that Lonnie Walker has been an atrocious defender over the course of his career. And while he might be the tallest member of that group that we mentioned out there, he is probably the worst defender, or at least tied with Russ, in that group. So that limits you. Schröder's 6'1", Nunn is 6'1", Beverly is 6'1". Like there are practical limitations here. And if you try to get all those guys on the floor, it means you're not going to be able to play your centers, which is actually a position, I think, of relative strength for this team, or certainly could be a kind of low key strength that they have. It's going to be very difficult to get some of these other guys, see if Juan Toscano Anderson can help you. It is not, they have too many guards. You can chop it up and, talk about how different guys do different things and all of these things. And that may be true. They have too many guards, and trying to play them all is going to be problematic and is going to compromise their ability to do other things.
Well, they're definitely not going to be able to play them all. I was thinking about it a little bit, and if you could theoretically have a rotation that has either Schröder or Russ as the starting point guard, because it's been, defined them as the ones. And then I think Patrick Beverley would start at the 2, because you're just going to need him for that defensive integrity and a little bit more versatility. LeBron, AD, pick a center. Then either Russ or Schröder as the backup, Kendrick Nunn as the 2, Austin Reaves as a 3, Juan Toscano-Anderson, or maybe Troy Brown as your backup 4, because they're the same size.
Again, you're going small. Yeah, you're going small.
Right, you're going small, but I'm just saying Toscano-Anderson had been, this is something that actually kind of dawned on me while going through this. Toscano-Anderson had been talked about much more as a backup 4 than Troy Brown, but the reality is they're the same size.
They're the same size, but
if anything, Brown is a little bigger. And then your other center. So
Toscano-Anderson is sort of a 3-4. He's played a tiny bit of center in really small ball lineups and stuff, but he's a 3-4. And
Right.
Troy Brown, I'm just looking it up on Cleaning the Glass. Like, this is obviously going to be very lineup dependent. How much 4 has he played in small lineups? Kind of curious now.
I'm not
but
even
anyway, go on.
I'm not even going that deep into the weeds. I'm just looking at this
I'm
point.
I'm just curious at this point.
Right. We're just picking out dudes who are theoretically big enough to do it in these lineups. And with that in mind, either Lonnie Walker and or Troy Brown, Juan Toscano-Anderson could be out of the rotation. I think some of this would depend on how much shooting you need, because Juan Toscano-Anderson doesn't shoot. Troy Brown is at least a credible, if low volume, 3-point shooter. Reaves, if his shooting doesn't pick up, he could maybe get beaten out by both of those guys because they might be better, more experienced defenders than him. I think it's going to be very interesting to see if everybody stays healthy, Reeves's utility this year. And we'll talk about it more at length. I can see an argument for it becoming much more valuable. I could see an argument for him looking more like a bright spot last season, who, if you put him on a more competitive team, doesn't serve quite as big of a role. I can honestly see it going in either direction. Either way, I think he's definitely not proven, but I think it is possible that you could play 5 of the guys on this roster who are listed as really considered guards. 6 would be pushing it unless they really just become collectively more sound defensively than I can picture.
Yeah, I mean,
and you play 1 fewer center.
Well, we're going to start as we get close to camp, as we get into camp and all that. We'll start breaking down the potential rotation, whatever, in more detail. But again, if you're going to try to play all 6 of those guys, and now LeBron and AD, you've got room, practically speaking, in your rotation for 2 more players.
Yeah,
because you're not playing an 11 or 12 man rotation with any kind of consistency.
No, I was thinking about this with 10 guys.
Right, and so I think 5 of those 6, practically speaking, I agree with you, is probably going to be the maximum. It poses some really interesting lineup problems, and I'll we'll see what happens in camp, and naturally some of these things start to shake out. Guys get hurt, they can't play, and so on and so forth. And to some degree, natural attrition will take care of some of these things, but they have too many guards. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you go to get the show a little bit early. You can see us make it. It is fun. We're plenty more to come. We're still setting up that show with Travis. It's going to be for Wednesday, correct, Andy? I believe tentatively so, yes. Our show with Travis Rogers, kind of peeking into the management structures of all 3 big LA teams, the Lakers, the Rams, and the Dodgers. Maybe where the Lakers are falling short in that group. So we're looking forward to that for Wednesday's show. Lots of other good stuff coming up. And of course, Media Day is next week. So all right. We'll see everybody next time.